leaseholders. Okay, and also Ruth Bravery, who represents Friends in High Places, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. As far as I'm concerned, I am an affected leaseholder. I'm just across the water actually, because I live in Greenwich rather than Tower Hamlets. Just a little bit about LondonCAG. We formed probably 15 or 16 months ago, and we're actually almost a branch of UK CAG. And what we wanted to do was to give London a separate voice, because we've got so many blocks in London that are affected. And of course, we know that Tower Hamlets is the most affected borough in London anyway. And we're part of the collaboration of partners across the country, which you will often hear termed as End Our Cladding Scandal. So we're part of that. And our role actually is about bringing people together, leaseholders, and trying partly to campaign on a national basis, but to bring leaseholders to help solve some of the problems we face. And that, of course, in terms of our national campaigning, what our main goals are at the moment is to make sure the Building Safety Fund covers all defects in blocks, not just cladding. And also, we're obviously concerned with those blocks under 18 metres, where the government is saying they would provide loans to, although our view is no leaseholder should be liable to pay back those loans. So we are looking at full funding models. So delighted that everybody's joined tonight, and I know we've got a number of speakers with us lined up for you, and local politicians. I'm glad to say we've got the Mayor here as well, John Briggs. We've got the local MP, Rashana Ali. We've got Umesh, the GLA member for City and East, and we've got Rabina Khan, one of the councillors as well. And I'll introduce them a little bit more later, but they're very welcome. I know some of them have got to go quite early on, so we'll just fit around the agenda for that. But first, before we get into the meat of the meeting, I'll perhaps just ask Harry whether he would like to introduce himself and Tower Hamlets for Justice for Leaseholders.
Thanks very much for coming, everyone, today. So what I just wanted to be very quick to talk about is obviously Tower Hamlets is the worst affected borough. We've got about 282 blocks or developments with the Building Safety Fund. We're approving high-rise towers all the time. In my day job, I work for Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, the leaseholders charity. This very much is an issue that grows out of the leasehold tenure, because basically in our country, you buy a flat and you don't own it outright, but someone else controls your home and your service charges and the contractors and the managing agent. So obviously if work needs doing, something as huge as, you know, building safety, cladding, insulation, whatever, someone else is potentially making a cut, but you've not got any control of your household bills. And we're seeing that with Waking Watch, which is ruining lives at the moment. And we came together in January this year, just as a sort of group, to help Ruth with her work. She'll explain a little bit later, but this is affecting everyone of all classes, and it shouldn't be seen as an issue that just affects people in the swanky Docklands penthouses. This is affects, you know, shared owners, even people in social housing where they've missed the government fund. And this should not be seen as a party political issue. This should be an issue that the Lib Dems, Labour, Conservatives, Brexit Party, you name it, everyone needs to get behind this, because people have bought homes in good faith and they're being saddled with bills of up to 110, 20,000. And my own personal view is where Tower Hamlets can play a role. Of course, it can't change the law and it's not the government, but it could actually take a kind of campaigning role. So there was a protest outside Parliament last February. We had Andy Byrne, we had Sadiq Khan with his entourage that rocked up. We need Tower Hamlets, especially given that they're approving all these leasehold developments going forward, to make sure that while we've got a problem now, we're not creating future problem buildings.
Okay, thank you, Harry. Ruth, would you like to say a few words about Friends in High Places?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ruth Bravery and I live on the Isle of Dogs. And the Friends in High Places group we formed about 4 or 5 years ago, before Grenfell, which, as you know, yesterday was the 4th anniversary of that terrible event. But we'd actually been formed before then because we were effectively a self-help group to help each other deal with our management of our estates and our service charges. So most of us are like a resident association, committee members, right to manage directors, and there's quite a few estates around now where people have owned their own freehold. So we've been existing for a long time trying to help each other with these enormous challenges and responsibilities. But we've wanted for a while now to actually put on something for all leaseholders across Tower Hamlets, because so many people are struggling hugely with this horrible issue. So we're really grateful to London Cladding Action Group and also to the various people who are going to speak today to make this time available and to support everybody. If you want to be part of our group, please just put a message in the chat and we can make contact.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Just in terms of tonight's conference and a few house rules, obviously we've got a lot of people on board at the moment. We've actually muted everybody. Although we want everybody to have an opportunity to ask questions of the speakers, and how I'm planning to organise this is if you put those questions in the chat, we've got Lucy Brown, who's hosting the conference. Hopefully you can see Lucy in the top corner of the screen, and she will ask them on your behalf. So yeah, feel free to put your questions in the chat. What I'm just going to start off with, I'm sorry, I'm just jumbling up the originally planned agenda tonight because of the speakers and some have got to leave. We've got some case studies of affected leaseholders, and we were going to get them to just give us a short, brief overview of where they are and what they've been doing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of those now, because I know that they've got to leave probably in 5 minutes, and then go to the other case studies later on in the meeting after the speakers. So could I pass over to Chloe, who's going to say a few words for us about her experience?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dave. And sorry for having to rush off. And I'm sure I don't have to leave it like on the dot in 5 minutes and dial in when I'm on the bus as well, because I just love to hear more of what's happening here. It's really great to get everyone together. So I'm from Barking Riverside, and we're quite an active leaseholder group. I live in a block called Caspian Quarter. There's 6 blocks in total, 314 flats, and we all have flammable timber balconies in close proximity to ACM cladding with polyethylene core, so that's the same as what was used on Grenfell. So we're told that we only have to have those balconies replaced. So in a way, we're not in the worst situation. But I'll talk a little bit more detail about what our situation is looking like. The reason we're such an engaged group of leaseholders, it's probably important to say, is that we had a very bad fire in 2019 in Samuel Garside House, which was absolutely covered in wooden cladding. I witnessed the fire. It spread within minutes. It was horrific. I ran towards it. I could hear people screaming. I thought that people were probably dead. Thankfully, no one got badly hurt, but that was quite, you know, a sort of rude immersion into the realities of what these sort of, you know, cladding your building in flammable material. With my very own eyes, I saw the destruction that this could cause. So replacing your balconies is, you know, of all of the things, one of the lowest of the costs. So, you know, we hope we should be looking at 4-figure rather than a 5 or even a 6-figure sum, which I know many leaseholders are staring down the barrel of at the moment, which would absolutely destroy me and probably everyone here, because we live in the cheapest flats within the M25, right? That's what Barking Riverside is. Caspian Quarter is 95% help to buy. So that is, you know, that means we've got 40% government loan. Many of us, myself included, who are going to have to start paying that back at a very high interest rate next year. Obviously hadn't factored that one in because I thought I'd be able to move, and I can't because I have a B2 rating. It means I can't sell my flat. I can't even remortgage, so I'm going to be on a higher mortgage rate, I'm going to be paying higher interest costs. It all stacks up. So, you know, you're getting higher and higher and higher into that 4 figures, plus the cost of obviously replacing the balcony at great cost. So that's kind of a bit of the context to the problem situation. Oh, I should add, our building is under 18 metres. We don't qualify for the Building Safety Fund. Not that we would anyway, because it doesn't extend to balconies. It is only to replace cladding on high-rise buildings. So, you know, leaseholders are left to pick up the bill. We have another problem whereby the freeholders have instructed our managing agent, Encore, not to act until they've got 100% of the funds, which, let me tell you now, it's just not going to happen. Like, people have been through coronavirus. You know, I have mentioned the point before, but we're not rich people. We don't have not everyone has got access to a spare few grand, certainly not without being able to remortgage their house. So we're in a bit of a catch-22 situation here. So we could very well remain trapped in this unsafe situation. And should we get the balconies replaced successfully, worst case scenario, and, you know, potentially free to sell next year, we have to get the EWS 1 report done in order to do so. And we still have this ACM cladding. So I have my doubts as to whether we'll be able to do that. I'm trying to be concise, I'm sorry. Joanne is going to talk now about a bit about the protests that we've organised, and also about how we've engaged Margaret Hodge, our MP, and the kind of results that we've seen through that.
Sorry, I was under the impression that I can't unmute myself, but I can. Thank you, Chloe, and thanks for inviting us. So basically, you know, all this background and also the Samuel Garside House fire background, where our residents association had already protested you know, 2 years ago with regards to that. When we found ourselves in the situation that we're in, it was a relatively easy decision for us to protest at Bellway Sales Office, which is in phase 2 of our development. And also, you know, it was during the time when the fire safety bill amendments were being ricocheted around the House of Commons and House of Lords. It was very plain to see that the government was not going to help us. So we didn't really see any other way out, and our first protest attracted up to 60 people, and, you know, it was not advertised very widely, just in the local area. After that, when, you know, we said on social media we've done this, there was some interest from, you know, other people who were also fed up with their situation and were trying to take control of, you know, what was happening to them. So long story short, we've conducted some online workshops. We've had 2 more protests at Barking Riverside, and on June 5th, we coordinated a total of 17 protests across the country against, you know, developers and the practices, the greed and the indifference to ours and everyone else's situation. We have gotten quite a lot of media coverage, and I think there was more coverage preceding the Grenfell anniversary than there would have been otherwise, had it not been for the protests. And yeah, we'll continue direct action because, as I say, we are helpless and no one else is going to help us.
Okay. Thank you, Joan, for that, and Chloe, and for coming along tonight as well. And sorry probably to rush us on a little bit, because I know some of the other speakers have got to go. But what I would like to do now is to pass us over to the Mayor of Toller Hamlets, and I'm very grateful for his time tonight, John Biggs. So John, you're very welcome. I know you've been the Mayor for some time. You've also been a GLA member, so you've seen it from that side as well. But you're very welcome, and thank you for coming.
Okay, so I've been asked to speak for 5 to 10 minutes, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe questions.
Yeah.
And I should tell you that one of my cabinet members, Eve McQuillan, who has the brief for this area, amongst other things, is going to stay in the meeting, even if I have to leave in a few minutes' time. So, as has been said, 4 years since the Grenfell fire, and it's been, I guess, an unfolding horror story in terms of people's safety and fear of harm. I'd like to disagree with the previous speaker who said that no one will help us so we have to campaign. I'd agree with you, you have to campaign, because that needs to raise the profile of this issue. But a lot of us do want to help you in different ways and to lobby and campaign for safety. I know there are twin monsters here. One is safety, obviously, that's not negotiable. We need to be safe in our homes, we need to be confident. But the other is the enormous potential financial liability people face as well, and the uncertainty of that places, because most of us aren't wealthy, and our home will be our greatest asset. As has been said by Harry, Tower Hamlets is, I guess you could call us ground zero in terms of fire risks and tall buildings, because we have more of them than anywhere else in the country. And so that's focused our minds. We've been spending a lot of time as a local authority looking at this issue over the past few years. I guess we've realised quite how feeble in some ways our hand is. We have health and safety responsibilities through our environmental health department. We have a number of other expectations placed on us by the government. Predominantly, but not just, this is an issue that concerns private sector housing, but also shared ownership housing. The number of social rented tenants affected by this is considerable, but because of the rate at which such properties are being built, it's a lesser issue in terms of numbers. And the government is underwriting the remediation of socially rented properties. So in terms of liability, or at least they say they're underwriting that, in terms of liability, this is a big issue if you're an owner or if you're a part owner. And of course, there's this multiplier effect where if you have a shared ownership property, you may only own half the building, but you might be liable for the entirety of the cost of remediation or capital works. And that's like an albatross around your neck. So that's part of the context. When Grenfell happened, we were all became knowledgeable about the acronym ACM in terms of the cladding. But that rapidly moved on to questions about other types of cladding. So HPL cladding came up as an issue. And then it evolved into something bigger, which is, I guess, the more generic issue of external wall systems. And naive people like a lot of us were in the past, who look at a building and think, hey, this is a building made of bricks, increasingly find that modern buildings are made of all sorts of stuff. They may look like they're made of bricks, but they're quite often not made of bricks. And they have a form of construction which has got layers to it. And it may well be that when you peel off the outer skin, so say you simply think you need to replace the cladding, when you peel off that outer cladding, you find underneath it that there are all sorts of other problems that need to be remediated. And that takes us on to the fourth three-letter acronym, which is the fire risk assessment. So every building needs to have a proper fire risk assessment, and that needs to be kept up to date. And that should be, in my view, although there are quibbles about this, publicly accessible, so that all residents can have access to a fire risk assessment for their block. They can challenge it, and we can be sure about what's needed to bring our buildings up to date. So that all is pretty established stuff. But I guess there's another couple of big issues here, and I think this is going to be quite a lengthy campaign, although it's such an obvious problem that no one can walk away from it in terms of failing to take the issue seriously. But there are issues, I think, within that picture I've drawn about safety, obviously, about financial liability, but within that, there are a couple of things. One is about whether people have a duty of care towards each other, and clearly they do. If I do something reckless, then you are at risk as a result of that. I have a duty to remediate that. One part of the untangling of this problem is about working out who is liable and who will meet those bills. If I'm a builder and I acted in totally good faith in building something which the building's research people told me was safe and everyone was using it, then am I still liable? And I think the answer must be yes, because we need to be confident that we're behaving in a safe fashion. So there's a question about liability and about who's responsible for what and what information we can have open access to. But I think underlying this is another issue, which is about the balance of power between the different parties in the case of leasehold buildings. And we buy an apartment, it's got a glossy brochure, it looks okay. We're not experts. We get a survey which which is not an intrusive survey. It tells us it's okay. We buy the property, and then we find we have a liability because of something that's happened. And clearly the balance of power between ourselves and experts is way out of proportion. So we need to have forms of access to advocacy and to technical advice, which make sure that we know where the faults are, and that we can have access to information which help us to understand the problem and to try to remediate it. There have been a number of inquiries and acts of parliament. So the Grenfell inquiry is going on and on and on, and it's quite right, it's a thorough inquiry, but like a lot of public inquiries, it's potentially going to last many years, and its conclusions might still be 2 or 3 or 4 years in the future, and it will need to lead then to action. So it has led to some actions already with the Fire Safety Act. The Building Safety Bill is going through Parliament, and that will hopefully lead to better clarity. As a local authority, we have a general sort of duty of advocacy or a power of advocacy. We have an environmental health department which is liable for ensuring that people are safe if it becomes aware of risks. So we have a right to access confidential reports and so on. And then there's a question of whether those reports should be open. But I guess there's a wider issue, which is where does this end? And most people will look to their local council and say, you know, what can you do to help us? In the past, I would hear from social housing tenants, council tenants, people who had relatively little and were seeking the council to use our housing to help them to live in our borough. Increasingly, myself and my colleagues are getting deputations from leaseholders who ordinarily would have expected to be able to look after their own affairs, and are now finding that they simply don't have access to the information, don't have enough levers. And so I guess the reason I'm here this evening, I've set a sort of a more general background from my understanding, is partly to listen, to hear from you, to keep in touch with you. So I applaud the work of the Cladding Action Group and also the more local organisation, Friends in High Places, which I think is doing fantastic work in putting this on the agenda. What we want to do is to keep the dialogue open. We need to be very clear where responsibilities lie. I suppose if you were to push me into a corner, I would say very clearly, developers are liable for the problems that they caused, and we must hold them liable for that. If they are bankrupt or don't exist, then the government must step into that as well. I mean, leasehold charges are a recurrent issue. You know, we'd much rather not pay them, but there are reasonable levels of leasehold charges, but unreasonable levies which are unforeseeable as a result of the negligence or the false certification of things, or something that we addressed as well. So hopefully that sets a sort of background in a fairly sort of technical way. I can be a bit more rhetorical, if you like, and say the following: that, you know, our residents in Tower Hamlets, we're the fastest growing place in the country, the highest densely populated local authority area in the country. Our residents deserve to live in safety and be confident that they can sleep in their beds at night, and that they're not going to be bankrupted by bills as well. It's as simple as that, really. And if I can help you to secure that outcome, to keep plugging away on it, then I would be happy to do that. We're looking as a local authority about what resources we can bring to bear, although we have enormous budget pressures to help ensure, A, that people are safe and that we have access to technical information and the data gathering and so on, and B, in terms of signposting people towards advice so that you can better make your own cases as well, and we can work together to tackle this menace. So thank you for inviting me. I'll linger for a while. I may not be here a lot longer though. Thank you, Don.
Okay, thank you for that, John. I wonder if you've got still a couple of moments, we could take a couple of questions that we've had, which I think Lucy is probably going to ask for you before you disappear.
Sure. So I've had actually a lot of quite similar questions. One that's been asked a few times is, why is Tower Hamlets allowing the same developers who built the buildings with multiple fire safety defects to have new planning permission?
Okay, and the answer to that is both a bit technical, but also very simple. It is that the planning permission doesn't include regulation of the building codes or the materials used. It simply says this is a building, this is what it will look like, and this is what its design is. And we're not legally permitted to consider the fitness of an applicant in deciding whether to grant permission or not. So that's the simple answer. Whether that should change, whether we could start inserting safety issues in our planning policies is something we might want to look at. I think there's another part of the answer, which is that when I started off in local government, there's a function called the building control function, which was a local council function. That was deregulated. There might be great benefits in deregulating it. By that I mean that private companies now do building control work for a lot of construction companies, and that may work well. But of course, what it does is fragment accountability. So if we have statutory duties in terms of safety, and yet we don't have access to the files and the records and the certification of whether a building's safe, then I think that stores up a problem as well. And I'd like to think that the Grenfell inquiry will look at that in some detail. But the short answer to the question, which I started with before I went on and on with a longer answer, is that we don't have the power to refuse planning permission because the developer has a bad track record in what they've built. We need to use other regulatory powers, which I don't think we have strong enough powers in that area to challenge people when they don't build things safely.
Sorry, just so I understand that correctly. So you would potentially look at ways in which you can restrict planning permission to developers who've remediated their properties, but as it stands now, the council is not able to do that?
Every now and then I have to pinch myself and say, hang on a minute, John, you're a politician, and people might hear you giving politicians' answers. But I suppose, and that's not deliberate, that's not me trying to, it's just we live in a very technical world. So the council has a planning responsibility, which is simply about what you can build, where you can build it, whether it's conforming with our planning policies. And the planning policies are about the use of land. What this controversy and this crisis is about is the safety of the buildings once they're built. And that's a completely different function of a local authority. I think there are very limited ways in which we could look at our planning policies to stop people building things. Certainly we couldn't stop them building things based on their past record. We could, within our planning policies, look at issues like the configuration of the building. And I think within that, we'd look at whether it had enough fire escapes or whatever, because that's part of the design. But we couldn't stop to give another example, you could have the world's greatest developer who could get planning permission. They could then sell their site to someone who was the world's scuzziest developer who would inherit that planning permission, and they could build the place very recklessly. There's a disconnection between who builds it and who obtains the planning permission. It's a separate sort of part of things. But I suspect because this question is being asked again and again and again, people won't be satisfied with that answer, and they'll be asking people like myself and our members of parliament whether there are ways in which the planning laws should be changed so that people should not be able to obtain a planning permission if they have a record of not building safe buildings. But I think that might be barking up the wrong tree. I think it's got as much to do with making sure we have the right regulatory powers and powers of intervention and inspection to ensure that people are building things safely.
Okay, no, that makes it clear. Being asked if you would be willing to intervene on in meetings between the housing association and the developer where leaseholders have been given very large bills?
And the answer is very happy to do that. And we have done that, not just on the size of the bills, but we have sat down with housing associations and residents are both apprehensive about the continued safety problem, but also the size of the bills. The answer to that normally would be to get the government through their safety fund for housing associations to pony up the money for it to happen. That's not yet satisfactory because, for example, if you're below 18 meters, you may not be liable for funding through that. You might have to be paying £50 a month or whatever it is for the rest of your life. So that needs further progress from the government and the regulators. The problem that housing associations have is that they don't normally have very big reserves. So if they have 20 buildings that require remediating because they have a fire safety problem, then they will potentially get into financial difficulty unless they have a separate source of funding to meet that need. But that doesn't mean that residents have to pay it, in my view.
Okay.
Can I?
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, because I know John's got to go, and I know some of the other speakers. I think I'd probably like to go on all evening with some of the questions from John.
Can I be heard or not?
Yeah, John, can I thank you for coming along tonight? Very much appreciate your time, and I know you've unfortunately got to rush off. So can I say thank you?
Listen to the next speaker or two, but I'm really grateful, and I'm happy to come back to future meetings. And I think we're all becoming experts bit by bit, and we need to keep talking about this and raise its profile more and more. Thank you.
No, and I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Could I now pass over to our next speaker, which is Roshana Ali, who is the local MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, which I know you've been the MP since 2010. So can I welcome you to the conference and invite you forward?
Great, thank you very much, Dave. I just wanted to echo some of the things John said. Obviously, I don't want to go into repeat mode, but let's just think about the scale of the problem in London. And of course, it's London that faced the tragedy of Grenfell. And as we face the anniversary, we all remember that night and the loss of lives and the destruction of a community. And what is shocking is the failure of our government in not addressing the impact of that immediately. They've now had years to address those issues. And some of us had been raising concerns about safety before Grenfell. And none of us could have imagined that we would have the scale of the fire that we did, even in our worst nightmares. But in terms of some of the safety concerns, I was raising issues around safety to do with repairs and maintenance that was making the lives of some of my constituents of misery because of the way that the government was pushing the deregulation agenda, which meant that the housing regulator had its powers stripped of it and separated it and gave powers to the housing ombudsman. And that fragmentation that John was referring to meant that citizens were limited in getting repairs sorted out and doing the prevention work when they saw problems. And that was documented in relation to Grenfell, that residents had raised the alarm bells, but it fell on deaf ears. So some of the things that have been put in place, the deregulation agenda has created the conditions for lack of safety in our system, whether it's to do with the planning regulations, the issues around building controls, and if you privatize to that extent without local accountability, without oversight or legislative oversight, then the risks become greater. And what we are now seeing is the government inertia in tackling this problem head on. If you think about what happened after Grenfell, the first thing the government did was say that local authorities and housing associations should address the problems. And it was because of the campaigns like yours, parliamentarians pushing the government to provide funding that we, after a whole year, we managed to secure 200 million for social housing and RSLs. It took another year before they committed to another 200 million for private residents, but it's not enough. It's a drop in the ocean. And that's why your campaign and all the work that the Cladding Action Group is doing is so important. And that's why I just want to extend my support to all of you and to say to you that we are going to carry on. I know there have been setbacks. Many of you in my constituency have written to me about the legislation, about the amendments that MPs had put in that needed government support. We tried our best to try and get the government to make the changes to the Building Safety Bill. We will continue to work on the legislative front to address some of the issues that affect people with cladding. But the fundamental issues are around the funding. It's not adequate what's been provided. Although it's going some way for some people, it's not going to address the problems across the board. So the government needs to pay for the cladding to be removed. And if you know, frankly, this passing the buck that's been going on ever since Grenfell, including to private owners, is not good enough because it leaves residents stuck in the middle. So that's why I argued right from the beginning that the government should underwrite the costs, they should get the work done, and then if they can't recover the costs, they should take legal action against the private companies to recover that money, the freeholders. They should not leave our constituents to have to become the experts, to have to go and find legal support, to take on developers in order to pay for the cladding. As for the safety fund, you've all talked about the inadequacy of it. We are campaigning to ensure that buildings, all buildings that are unsafe are provided the funding that's needed in order to make them safe. I also made representations to the Treasury ministers about the issues to do with the EWS1 form, as well as insurance, which I know for many people, insurance is a major issue as well, where insurance companies are reluctant, and often they're either increasing the liability or stepping away from insuring buildings that have unsafe cladding. So there's, as John was saying, there's the finance dimension to all of this that's creating massive problems for families who need to move. There's the safety dimension where we need regulatory checks. We need the improvements on regulation to make sure that unscrupulous developers don't come in and build stuff that's not safe, which is what's been happening. Even the ones that are supposed to be credible have been found wanting. So those are the kind of multiple fronts that we've been working on in Parliament, getting the funding, although we've got a long way to go, getting the legislative changes in place that are desperately needed to improve the safety, and getting the changes that were making it more difficult for people to be able to get mortgages or remortgage, which means in effect they become mortgage prisoners because of safety issues and because of the state of the buildings. There are obviously other issues that are coming up. John, in the discussion with John, there have been points made about planning. I'd be very interested to hear from you all about what else we should be campaigning on in Parliament to address these issues. And the final thing I would say is that, of course, we will join you in protests and campaigns to show solidarity wherever possible. But the work that most of us have been concentrating on in Parliament has been holding ministers to account. The Chancellor, I sit on the Treasury Select Committee. Philip Hammond, when he used to give evidence to my committee, was constantly, in the first year, he kept passing the buck. And it was the pressure on a number of select committees, including mine, where we used that committee and the opportunity to get to him and then his successors to try and influence the Treasury. So, you know, regardless of which party people are in, the point somebody was making about building that cross-party alliance, that's really important. The amendments were proposed by Conservative colleagues. We got behind those because given the majority the government has, it's really important to get Conservative MPs to get behind the campaign. So what you're all doing and across the country through the UK Cladding Action Group is really vital in pressuring MPs to get behind the campaign and get legislative change. I just, as I say, I want you to know that I will continue to work on this agenda. We've taken every opportunity we can to have debates in Parliament to put ministers under pressure. One of the debates I held when Jim Fitzpatrick was the MP was just before the leaseholders meeting that he used to chair. And there were hundreds of people who had written to, possibly thousands, to the minister to say, you must attend the meeting because he wasn't going to, and you should explain what you're going to do. And just before the meeting began, he made the announcement for another 200 million. So it just goes to show the pressure that you will put in working with us is what can make the difference. We can't do that on our own. And I know that you can't on your own either. And I know at times it's really really depressing, and I certainly get depressed about the lack of progress despite everything we've been all doing. But it's moments like that when we can see the way these different campaigns come together that we start to see progress. So thank you again for everything you're doing, and I'm here. Please write to me if you're my constituent, if there's anything specific I can do to help. Some of you have done already, and of course we will continue to fight in Parliament and continue to seek resources and seek legislative changes and whatever else that we can get on your behalf. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Prashmara. I was just wondering whether we could take a couple of questions, if Lucy has some.
Yep, I have a few. I think it seems like there's a lot of confusion about Labour's position when it comes to cladding and fire safety issues. So if you could just clarify, if you wouldn't mind. So is it Labour's position that leaseholders should not have to pay for historic fire safety defects?
Well, I mean, look, I'm not in the Labour front bench, but as far as I'm aware, you know, we've never made the argument that leaseholders should be liable. It's the freeholders who are responsible for the kind of buildings we have now. The question is, the government has been arguing that the freeholders should be paying, and they shouldn't be paying tax, using taxpayers' money to make properties safe. The point is that the legislative context, the freeholders, as you know, come back and say, well, we were compliant against the legislative requirements that those who are developers that were there at the time. There's also the complication of freeholders selling on to others who weren't responsible for the developments. So it's a very complex picture. The simple thing to do, and the simplest thing for a government that should be there to protect people who are in this position, regardless of the status of their properties, is to underwrite the costs to make their homes safe, so that they can live at night, they can sleep at night in safety, so that we don't have the spectre of the fires that we've already seen, not only in Grenfell Tower, but also the subsequent ones. That would be the sensible thing to do. Frankly, that's what I would expect a Labour government to do, to get on with the job and go do the repairs, and then go after those who haven't, those freeholders, those developers who are liable, who continue to own those freeholds, to pay for it. I understand some of them, the government has got some of them to do it, to pay for it, but not to leave citizens, residents, stuck in the middle where they have to fight. They shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to be the ones who take on developers or those who are now freeholders. That's the argument, and we've been making that argument time and again. And building, you know, the other argument the government made, as you can see from the way that they allocated the funds, they gave 200 million first. I think it was 200. It might have been, oh, actually, it might have been 400 million for social housing and RSLs. Well, buildings are mixed tenure. There are private owners, leaseholders, and social housing tenants. A fire is not going to say, I mean, it's so ridiculous. We've had these debates in Parliament. A fire is not going to stop at the bit that's publicly funded. It's just ridiculous. So the delay is making everybody unsafe. That's what the government should be doing. And the responsibility of government is to protect, and they're failing that duty to protect residents.
On a more local level, there's been a few questions as to whether you would be willing to do what the likes of MPs in other areas, I think someone mentioned Lynn Brown, yes. And I know Chloe mentioned her MP, and whether you'd be open to getting involved on a case-by-case basis and in discussions with the developers.
We all, they're good friends of mine, London MPs, you know, across parties actually, but particularly London Labour MPs. We have our own group. We work on these issues together all the time, and there are cross-party networks as well, because obviously this issue is one where we have quite a great deal of common interests. So we all talk. We, of course, if there are gatherings, meetings that are being organised where you think it's going to be better for us to come together as a group and meet those developers, we're very happy to do that. But we, and also in debates, we tend to coordinate to try and secure debates, because many of you will be aware it's quite difficult to get parliamentary time. So we often put, 30 MPs will put their names down for Westminster Hall debates in the hope that one of us will get picked, and it will be on the same topic, so that we can get those debates. So we try and do those sorts of things, but certainly with meetings we'd be happy to.
Yeah.
And I think somebody posted, can I work with Margaret Hodge? She's a dear friend, and I work very closely with her. Lynn Brown as well, and others. Of course, my neighbouring MP Afsana Begum, in the light, and of course her constituencies had a fire recently, and I know John has been also John and others have been very involved.
Yeah, Richnara, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just I think I phrased the question badly. I think what I should have said is that, would you be willing for those affected people in your constituency, when they have meetings with the developers or the freeholder, would you be willing to attend and speak with them?
Yes, I would, and I have done. I have been. I've had meetings with in one case it was with a housing association and residents who were affected. But there have been a number already, but of course.
Great. Okay, Dave, shall we carry on?
Yeah.
No.
Can I thank you for coming along tonight, Roshana, and speaking to the conference. Sorry, apologies for that. And speaking to the conference, it's very much appreciated, and your support to leaseholders. Okay, thank you. Okay, can I introduce our next speaker, which is Unmesh Desai, who is actually a member of the Greater London Authority. And I perhaps should first of all congratulate you, Unmesh, on your recent re-election to the GLO. So congratulations on that, and welcome to the conference.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah, good evening. My name is Unmesh Desai, and I'm the local assembly member for Tower Hamlets. And my constituency of City and East also includes Barking and Dagenham, Newham, and the City of London. So unfortunately, thousands of my constituents are affected by the scandalous problems we are here to speak about today. And let me say this straight away. This issue is one of the great scandals of our time. And I'll try not to repeat what Rushnara and John have already said. I'll come to this meeting, to this conference tonight from a City Hall perspective. I agree with what John said, John Biggs. This is a long-term campaign, and it's about working together. And I think John also said we are all becoming, certainly in my case, experts bit by bit. Can also offer my sincere sympathies and solidarity with those who've been affected locally, particularly anyone present who lives at or was affected by the fire at New Providence Wharf. So I'm going to speak briefly about the challenges facing leaseholders in the area related to these issues, and then some of the ways in which we may be able to help from City Hall and elsewhere. And I just want to pick up the point that Joanna from Barking Riverside made, that we are helpless and no one is going to help us. And I think people like myself, John, totally understand the point, that the angle that Joanna is coming from. But one of the reasons why suddenly I made time to be here today is that it is my duty as a public elected representative, alongside Rushnara, Mayor John Biggs, Eve McQuillan, the cabinet member who's here with us, to actually be advocates for our constituents. So I hope I can do something tonight to dispel Joanna's fears that no one is there to help us. I don't underestimate the challenges before us. But I do want to give the reassurance that for me, this is a major campaign encompassing the whole of East London, which, as I think Harry reminded us, Tower Hamlets worst affected, 282 blocks. I was told this afternoon that 20% of the applications to the Building Society Fund is actually from Tower Hamlets. So London has thousands of leaseholders living in homes that pose a fire risk. We know that the response to this has been piecemeal and slow, with many unable to access funding because of an arbitrary 18-meter rule. Charlotte talked about that. We know that the pace of remediation is slow and that London's leaseholders are paying out millions of pounds each month because there are no legal protections to protect them. So the question we must now turn to is what can be done to resolve this issue, which and I know John and Richard have already said quite a bit, but what I can do from the Assembly, from City Hall. So it's important for us to recognize that due to the scale of remediation work required to resolve this issue, neither local nor regional governments such as GLA has the money or manpower, person power to do so. I could be absolutely honest about that. I don't speak for the Mayor of London, but I think it's important to recognize that what we need is central government action. The impetus, funding and strategy must come from central government, and sadly they've shown that so far they're unwilling to do so. In spite of the work of MPs like Rushnara and other MPs, this has got to be, as Harry said, a party political campaign. We've got to form the broadest possible front to actually force developers and freeholders or two separate entities and the government to take their responsibility. And a good example of that was a motion that we passed at the London Assembly last week, proposed by my colleague Anne Clark, the Assembly member for Camden and Barnet, newly elected, Farley, on calling for a number of measures about in connection with the building safety bill. The motion has attracted support from all parties, but the refusal of the government, I must say, to accept amendments to the fire safety bill, the government passing the problem of funding remediation works directly onto leaseholders who, as we know, not in a position to fund this and been put in this position through no fault of their own. That's simply not unacceptable. I think it was Harry Scofield who said people bought homes in good faith and they're now being let down in a very bad way. So when considering what can be done in London, it's important to understand the role of the London Fire Brigade, whose support of leaseholders in this situation comes in two ways. Firstly, through the transformation plan, the LFP, London Fire Brigade, are implementing the recommendations from the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1. The fire and its new leadership, led by Andy Rowe, has accepted these findings in the entirety and are working to ensure that all learning necessary as a result of the Grenfell Tower fire is made. And secondly, the brigade monitors high-risk buildings. Once a building has been identified as high risk by a competent fire safety professional, the responsible person for the building should contact the brigade in order for monitoring and inspection by the operational and fire safety personnel to take place. The brigade have a responsibility to ensure the responsible person acts on advice given. The brigade is one of the functional bodies of the GLA. That's why I'll spend some time talking about the role of the London Fire Brigade. There is a Fire and Resilience Committee at the GLA. I did ask to sit on it, but I didn't get the chance. But I will keep a close watch on its proceedings, and through my colleague Anne Clark, make sure that our presentations are heard loud and clear. The Mayor sets the budget of the Fire Brigade, approves the London Safety Plan, and can direct it to act. And there is a Deputy Mayor for Fire Resilience, Dr. Fiona Twycross, to whom I'm making representations about a number of cases I've already had from the constituency. I'm in Waterside Park in Newham. I met them with Stephen Timms, the local MP. One of the things that we found out was that the GLA actually the freeholders. So this afternoon, Tom Copley came to our private labour group meeting, and I did raise the issue, and he said he would look into it as to what the GLA as a freeholder can do, with looking at the terms of the lease and so on. In terms of London Assembly, how we can potentially help. Our primary job is to hold the mayor and deputy mayor, such as Fiona Twycross, and the functional bodies to account for the work they do in London. Through the Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee, the Assembly Secretaries of the Fire Brigade, operationally, financial management, strategic development. It previously, earlier this year, investigated the building safety scandal and released a report with a number of recommendations on the issue, making recommendations to the mayor. All this is on the website, but I will ensure that Dave does get the recommendations from the January committee, some of which relate to the questions that have been asked as to who should shoulder the burden, and in March. But in a local example of how the Assembly has helped to improve the London Fire Brigade's work in relation issue, we've helped to ensure that we are monitoring buildings is as thorough as possible and keeps leaseholders safe, such as at New Providence Wharf. Throughout the pandemic, the London Fire Brigade have continued to maintain this monitoring work as it believes that the risk of the buildings need monitoring is as great as the risk of the pandemic itself. And this is, I'm quoting Andy Rowe, the Commissioner, last week at the London plenary, where he said that the risk of the buildings needing monitoring for him is as great as the risk of the pandemic itself. The cost of this work has increased since 2017 with the need for the increased funding to the Fire Brigade in order to maintain service levels. The risk cost party support for this generally. The finer details, including levels of funding, remain to be seen. We from the Assembly will help ensure that the Brigade is making good progress in implementing the Grenfell Phase 1 recommendations and will help to hold the Brigade to account in this work. To give some brief thoughts on how I think things can be improved for leaseholders in relation to scandal, I'll start by saying we must firstly continue to collectively pressure the government to provide the necessary funding for leaseholders in the short term who are affected by the issue. I think John said if it's forced into a corner, we would say that it should be the government and the developers. I couldn't agree more. I don't need to be pushed to the corner. I think that they are the people who actually, that's what we like governments for, the big picture and the big solutions that leaseholders who through no fault of their own have been put in this pernicious situation. In the long term, we must see a strategy put in place that prioritizes buildings in need of remediation according to their risk in order to bring to an end the uncertainty leaseholders are living with. This plan, of course, must be backed with funding to its implementation. The strategy must also be supported by work undertaken with councils to gather data on what is needed in order to fully support leaseholders so that an accurate picture can be done or can be built up of buildings risk in London and to ensure those who need it receive the appropriate level of help. And that's something I'm doing at East London-wide basis to build that picture, to lobby and campaign alongside our MPs. I hope this provides a brief overview of the Assembly can work to help assist this issue, but I'm keen to to hear from you. I have to leave, but I will obviously keep in touch with Dave. So I will stay for a few more minutes so I can take, note any issues raised, fit this into my ongoing work. Just finally, Dave, I'm a member of the GMB trade union, and I seconded a motion last week at our GMB National Congress. It is now GMB official policy that the GMB and the cladding scandal campaign. So the trade union movement for what is, it still represents 6 billion people, will be adding its weight. I think I'll leave it at that. But I hope I brought a City Hall perspective and my commitment and assurance to everyone present that this is going to be one of my 4 or 5 major campaigns in East London. I'm now in my second term, with me, working together, you do have a voice at City Hall. So I hope that I've reassured Joanna in particular that you're not on your own.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Umesh. I was just wondering whether you've got time if Lucy's got a couple of quick questions for you.
Yeah, I will try. Well.
Yep. Sorry, and my dogs just decide to go crazy now. So actually, there's been a lot of questions about Waking Watch, and we've been asked a couple of times if it's possible for the GLA to work with the London Fire Brigade to see what measures can be used to get rid of the Waking Watch, which seem to be widely panned as both ineffective and wildly expensive.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the very term Waking Watch, my ex-colleague Andrew Dismore, who did a lot of work on this issue and on fire issues and safety issues in general, actually has collected evidence to show that these schemes are not effective at all. I will actually send the data that is collected. Personally, I think that actually we don't need this short-term or gimmicky sort of stuff. It's actually getting the remediation work done and done as quickly as possible. And it should be the builders, the developers, and or the freeholders working together to do this, and the government stepping in where necessary.
Okay. Do you know if once this data is completed, it may already be completed, is that something that the GLA will work with the London Fire Brigade on to try and come up with better alternatives and less expensive alternatives than the Waking Watch?
Certainly. I mean, if I can distinguish our role as opposed to the mayor, so we are two separate entities in that sense. But actually, from the data, the evidence we collect, those are recommendations we make to him, and use all our weight, a collective weight on a cross-party basis, to expose the ineffectiveness of schemes like the Waking Watch. I mean, the stories, the stuff I've heard from New Providence Wharf, that I'm just looking at my notes here, but
Yeah.
the Waking Watch scheme, that many residents heard neither the alarm nor the air horn that they've been told would be used by Waking Watch operators in case of fire. That was at New Providence Wharf. So
Yeah, and the average cost is £499 per flat per month in London.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, well, I think people will be really happy to hear that, so that's good news. Another question is, what is the GLA doing to help people facing these very unaffordable bills, and what can they do?
Well, I think this is where the mayor actually has made representations to the government to step in. I mean, I think I made it clear earlier that at the end of the day, in terms of person power and funding, the jail is not the right, cannot step in. But the mayor has made representations. I'm just looking at, I did ask his office for a briefing on what he's doing about, is written to building owners who have yet to start work to remediate ACM, to emphasize the urgency of removing unsafe cladding. There's more advocacy role, a more representational role. Is also advocated in terms of the EWS1 form, made representations about people, leaseholders trapped in unreliable flats. But I can send a note about some of the various stuff that he's done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think people would love to hear that. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
at all. Yeah.
Okay. Can
I'll
I?
be in touch with you, Dave, in the next few days, and then hopefully get this submit stump from City Hall to everyone at this conference. And I'll make a note. And if there are any further questions, just send them through to me, and I shall endeavour to get them replied to within a week, couple of weeks. Yeah.
Be great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, and can I add my thanks to that, and Mission will certainly get you the questions that have come through tonight. So thank you very much. Can I just carry on, because I know we've actually got somebody on the call that is actually from Thames Water, somebody called Simon Moore, who's given up his evening just to come and talk to us briefly. And this is a reflection, and some of you will have read or heard in the press about some of the things that were apparent at the New Providence Wharf fire, and we've got somebody, a resident there, that's just going to talk to us later. But one of the issues was regarding about the fire brigade and the water pressure in the area. So I'm glad to say that somebody from Thames Water, with Simon Moore, has come along just to talk about some of their things that they're doing and trying to address various issues. So thank you for coming, Simon, and welcome to the conference.
Well, good evening. Thank you very much for having me along. So yeah, my name's Simon Moore. My role in Thames Water is I'm the London Water System Planning Manager. So I work in our asset management department, kind of looking at the sort of medium to longer term plans for London's water systems. Been sort of asked to come along tonight to give a bit of an overview of the water supply system, which feeds the Iron of Dogs, especially in relation to the ability to continue to support growth and fire flows in the area. So I'll give a sort of short overview of the problems that relate to growth in general, describe a bit about how the area is supplied, and give a bit of an update on the plan to meet the sort of forecast demands over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Very happy to take any questions you might have on the night, or if you have any sort of further questions, please feed them back through Dave after the session. So in terms of sort of flows and pressures in the water system, they are interrelated to each other. So higher pressures enable higher flows to come through pipes, essentially pushing more water through an orifice of a given size over the same period of time. So if you open your customer's tap or a fire hydrant or have a burst main, then more water would pass through that in a higher pressure scenario. Higher demands reduce pressures. So essentially generating more points where water can leave the system before it reaches your tap. So think of it like the more holes you have in your hose pipe, the worse the flow rate out to the end and the closer you have to stand to your plants to water them. Water pressure can vary substantially across the day or the week or the year due to factors both within and outside of a water company's control. So factors like bursts or changes in customer demands, fire demands, etc., can all change the available sort of flows and pressures within a system. And it can also vary over time. So often due to sort of growth or changes in demand. So if a factory closes, for example, then obviously there's more water available in the rest of the system, and equally a large development comes online, and that can impact water pressures if suitable planning hasn't taken place beforehand. The Isle of Dogs is part of a flow monitoring zone, which is a kind of a discrete area of our network in Thames Water, which we call Finsbury Park. So it was previously fed from the reservoir up in Finsbury Park, which is now disused, and water comes down from the north from our Copper Mills treatment works up in Walthamstow. This is one of Europe's largest water treatment works, and it takes water off the Lee Valley chain of reservoirs to the north of it. And the water is supplied from Copper Mills down, so north to south, coming down to the Isle of Dogs via a quite substantial network of trunk mains. Now, those trunk mains were designed well over 100 years ago to take water to what were the demand points at that point in time. So as you can imagine, the kind of docks and the sort of industries that there were around the Isle of Dogs at the time did not have the kind of demands that currently we see with the offices and domestic properties in the area. So we're having to change to deliver our plans now to support that level of growth, and it's quite substantial growth in the Isle of Dogs. It's one of the hotspots across London, one of the sort of key London growth areas, as you're obviously very well aware on this call. But in order to support that substantial growth in the area, we will be constructing a new trunk main, which we're currently sort of going out to tender at the moment to agree which contractors will be delivering that on our behalf. Around 1.6 kilometres of pipeline going from Mile End Road to East India Dock Road, largely along the length of Burdett Road. So it's an 800 mil pipeline, substantial trunk main. It will take a couple of years to construct, and we expect that to be constructed by 2025, which from the forecasts that we have in terms of number of properties coming online over that period of time will be sort of well ahead of time for when it's actually going to be critical to make sure that the area is kept in supply with water. I am aware there have been a number of issues relating to pressure on the Isle of Dogs, and I've previously attended local scrutiny meetings with Tower Hamlets and had discussions with Councillor Wood, who I believe is on this call tonight, around some of those issues. There's been a substantial improvement in the area over the last couple of years, largely due to a huge amount of work that my operational colleagues have been doing to try and resolve some sort of pinch points within the existing system, to sort of divert water and effectively sort of say reduce the restrictions that were previously present within the system, which before the sort of new development and growth and everything came online that we've seen so far weren't so much of a problem. Having done that, we've now increased water pressures on average across the Isle of Dogs by around 50%, and are now sort of substantially sort of above the level where we are to have a legal obligation to meet in terms of the local pressures and flow available within the network there. So that work is largely complete. There are still a couple of areas that they're still investigating within the area, but we found some quite substantial trunk mains which weren't being used optimally within that system. Being able to open those up fully, get the water flowing from north to south, and see that substantial improvement to performance in the area. So as things stand at the moment, we have no concerns about fire flows on the Isle of Dogs overall. And as I say, by the time the new growth and demands come online over the coming sort of 5 to 10 years, in accordance with the profiles that we're working towards, the new pipeline will ensure that remains the situation. It was highlighted to me in the sort of preparation for this meeting that there was some concern around a particular fire in New Providence Wharf on the 7th of May. I've actually heard back from the London Fire Brigade this afternoon that they didn't have any reports of any concerns from the instance commander at the time. Oh, yes, sorry. Yes,
carry on, Simon. And
oh,
then
sorry.
when
Okay,
you're
yes.
finished, I am going to ask you a question.
No, absolutely. Yes.
I'm permitted to speak because I'm one of the speakers. Carry on.
No, of course. Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Natalie. So yes, so there are no concerns that the fire brigade are aware of, but obviously, Natalie, it sounds like you might have some more information on that, which would be great to hear later on. So we are working really closely with the fire brigade. We have dedicated members of our team who are in close cooperation with the fire brigade. We have systems where we're able to share information around the performance of our network to help the firefighters to go to the best hydrants with the highest flow rates to help them to support incidents across London, actually. And it's a new system that we put in place, which they've had access to for the last year or so, which has had a really good response from the firefighters. So from that was sort of where I wanted it to take you through from a water point of view. For a wastewater point of view, that's not a specialist area for me at all, but my colleagues provided a bit of an update to me on that. And again, there are no particular concerns, and actually there's actually some benefit to us from the new developments which are planned for the Isle of Dogs. You may be sort of aware of sustainable urban drainage, the schemes and the approaches that we were able to work with developers and local councils and authorities as part of the planning process to help to attenuate surface water discharge. This is to slow down the rate at which stormwater and rainwater enters our system. And by working with the local authorities within Tower Hamlets, in particular, and in accordance with the London plan, we've been able to attenuate the surface water discharge here quite substantially, which actually offsets the additional water, the foul water, which will be entering our system from the new development. So, as I say, from a wastewater point of view, there are no particular concerns here, and actually, it looks like it could well be of benefit to our wastewater system on the Isle of Dogs. But hopefully I've explained that clearly enough. It's not a specialist area for myself anyway. But look, if I sort of hold it there and go and return to that question, and obviously please let me know if any other questions you might have.
Okay, thank you for that, Simon. Can I perhaps ask Natalie to pose a question to you? So Natalie.
Yes, potentially. So I realise that we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for other people to ask their questions. So I won't do my little spiel, but Simon, obviously it was quite a traumatic event when it happened at New Providence Wharf, and it's also a very large building, right? So it's made up of 5 blocks. So I can get out of Block B, whilst Block D is on fire, absolutely fine. So you have a probably extraordinary and unflattering social media experience of what happened during that time, and it took half an hour. So the fire department showed up literally within minutes, so fast, it was incredible. And they all went inside and started trying to fight the fire from the inside, which we understand, or we've been told, is what should be done, and that's the most effective way to fight fire. But cladding is on the outside of the building, not on the inside. So the outside of the building is what was catching fire and spreading fire very, very quickly. And the fire department showed up, and they tried to use several hoses. Actually, they went through several, and it's only the 8th floor. Now, everybody on this call, I'm sure that most of you live in buildings that go beyond the 8th floor. I mean, the building I live in goes to the 19th floor. The building next door goes up to the 40th floor. There are buildings being built in Canary Wharf that go up to the 70th, 80th floor. These are incredibly high-rise buildings. When the fire department showed up and tried to get a hose onto where the fire was, only the 8th floor couldn't get anywhere near it. And in the end, they had to wait until eventually an aerial appliance showed up which took somebody far enough up, and then they eventually found an appliance or something that gave them the water pressure that allowed them to get to the fire. So actually, it wasn't the most edifying experience, and I don't blame that on the fire department at all. I just wonder if perhaps, you know, in Tower Hamlets, particularly on the Isle of Dogs in this area, we have built too quickly without giving consideration for the infrastructure and for the safety of all of the people who are on this call, for the residents of Tower Hamlets. Do we really know that we have built and accounted for what will ultimately make us safe? Because at the end of the day, the New Providence Wharf fire, I mean, it started in a fuse box. You know, it wasn't water, it wasn't anything else. It started in a fuse box. And had it not happened at the time that it did, had it happened earlier, you know, a lot more people would have died. But in terms of our access to water, Simon, our access to water pressure, our access to fire ladders, our access to anything that is going to support what is a completely different area, basically across, you know, most of the rest of the country. Are we really ready for it? And I think that's what we're trying to talk about today, right? This is a particularly unique part of the country where we've got the most dense population of high-rise buildings. We've got the highest number of applications into the government for government funding, for cladding, for all of the rest of the various fire issues. And I'm sorry, Simon, I was there that day, I watched it. Yep. The water didn't come out of the hose, it kind of dribbled. That's quite scary. So, and to think that the water's coming from Finsbury Park, I mean, that's miles away. We live on the Thames. There must be a better way, surely. Surely there is something that we can do today, maybe not today, but in the short term, where we can get together and go, you know what, this is an extraordinary, Tower Hamlets is an extraordinary place where you've got more high rises than literally anywhere else in the country. And I don't think our infrastructure is set up for it. I don't think our water is set up for it, Simon. I just don't think that we've got the planning and infrastructure in place to keep the residents of Tower Hamlets safe. Okay. And I don't know what you have to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, that sounds like a very distressing thing to have had to witness. And, you know, fortunately, I've never been in that position. So I do empathise with you there. It's just a couple of points that I think would be of interest to you. So in terms of the way that an appliance fights a fire, the hoses are connected to our fire hydrants or connected to other assets on our network or village ponds or whatever source of water a fire appliance is able to access. The pumping that comes out of that appliance is an onboard pump. So if you imagine it, you're talking eight stories high of a property, which you're trying to get to roughly sort of 24 meters if you consider about sort of 3 meters per story, and obviously well above that for many of the other properties in London. No water network would be able to supply water unpumped to the top of those properties. So you will almost certainly have, well, you will have boosters in the bottom of your property to supply water to your taps in your kitchen.
Okay, so what you're saying is the water supply was okay, but the pumping mechanism is what didn't work.
Well, yeah, there's a reference to a turntable ladder in the comments field here. So a turntable ladder has a much higher volume hose on it, and a turntable ladder will pump out at around about 100 meters pressure. So in other words, that's enough energy to lift that water 100 meters up from ground level. So So what the hydrants or whatever that source of water might be, the River Thames in some cases, you know, that obviously you have, like, there's a fire boat on the Thames as well, isn't there? What that source of water is doing is keeping those tanks on board filled up, from which it's then pumped and controlled through the hoses.
No, that's interesting. That's good.
If that gives you any reassurance.
So what you're saying is that the water supply is not the problem; it's the supply mechanism that's the problem. Because obviously we're not trying to point fingers and blame someone.
No, I totally understand.
We just want to live through the next fire. So
yeah, no, I totally understand, and that, I'm hoping that's reassuring to you in some way. And to say that the pumps can supply that, and they will also obviously fill up the dry risers within properties. You connect hoses from the appliance to the dry riser within the property to allow firefighters to fight a fire from inside the property as well. So that's another way of getting water up the building. But
so it's maybe not a question for you, and it's a question for somebody else, and I'd love to know who it's a question for. But if the supply of water is not a problem, but the pressure in order to make it actually effective against a fire is a problem, who's that we speak to?
Well, that sounds like a fire brigade question, but I'm really, you know, we work very closely with the London Fire Brigade, and I really don't want to sort of sit here and throw them under the bus. But from the way you've described.
No, you're right. No, nor do I, and I'm sorry. No.
Sorry,
Dave. I sort of took over.
No, that's right. Yeah, and I appreciate we're struggling with time at the moment, and I do need to get on to the next speaker.
Everybody else's questions, not just mine.
Yes. Okay. But yeah, thank you, Natalie, for that question. Can I also thank you, Simon?
You're very welcome.
For coming along tonight and actually explaining the position, because I think that's really helpful for people to understand that. So I appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Simon. And as I said, we're struggling a little bit for time and overrunning, but we've got one last speaker that I would just like to call, which is Rabina Khan, who is the local councillor for Shadwell from the Liberal Democrats. So Rabina, I believe you're around. I can't see you on the call at the moment. There you are. Yes. So sorry for the long wait, and appreciate time. And welcome. I welcome you to the conference.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for inviting me to speak here. I am a Liberal Democrat councillor in Shadwell, but I'm also an advisor in the House of Lords, and I work with some of the peers who have been campaigning very hard and putting amendments forward to stand up for the rights of leaseholders. I would like to pay my respects and remember all the people, the bereaved and the families and the communities who have been impacted on by the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The 14th of June is a day that we will never forget, because we are right here today because of that effect. I wanted to just quickly turn to one thing about cross-party work. Liberal Democrats are working very hard to ensure that we work with cross-parties, whether it's the Conservatives or the Liberal or the Labour Party. So we're very open to making sure that the rights and responsibilities and the protection that leaseholders have a right to are upheld. I wanted to just talk about Baroness Cathy Pinnock. Now, Baroness Cathy Pinnock, in November 2020, she attached an amendment to the Fire Safety Bill, and it simply stated that leaseholders and tenants must not be asked to pay for any of the remediation that makes their homes fire safe. Now, that was successful because what it did, it posed a challenge to the government to address head-on the issues and the problems that leaseholders face throughout, not just in Tower Hamlets, London, but across the country. She also argued that the government had access to £1.6 billion and that could be recuperated from the developers. And I stand by that point because I think the money that the government has put aside is not enough. So as of February 2021, the UK government put £5 billion aside for remediation works, but we actually need £50 billion, and leaseholders should not be paying for that. I want to touch upon leaseholders who are trapped in social housing associations. Now, in my ward, I have a housing association that has fire safety works. and the fire safety works were carried out prior to the government fund being announced. Now that means a number of leaseholders who've had the works carried out will have to pay for it because they were not eligible for the grant because it hadn't been announced. But another group of leaseholders from the same housing association will not need to pay for it because the housing association put the bid in at the time of the announcement of the funding, the building fund. Now, what it shows is that we now have within my constituent, within my ward, we have a group of leaseholders who will have to pay and a group of leaseholders who don't need to pay just because the government was very slow to act. So for me, that's really important to make sure that as leaseholders on the Isle of Dogs, there are actually people out there in housing associations who've also been impacted on. I've also met with leaseholders on the Isle of Dogs, and I'd arranged Caroline Pigeon, our GLA member at the GLA, to meet them, and we've raised a number of inquiries. I'm interested actually on a local level, because on a local level, Harry said very much earlier on, we have 282 buildings that are affected by fire safety, and almost 300 buildings have made an application to the government grant fund. But not all of them will get that funding. So what happens to all those leaseholders who are going to be trapped in unsafe homes? Well, first of all, and I'm going to pick up on what Simon and Natalie were talking about, and that is the turntable, the ladder, the tall ladder. I think in a borough that has so many homes that has been impacted by fire safety, by cladding, and people feeling unsafe, that we as the council should invest in purchasing a tall ladder so that we've got it here and that we can put that and make at least leaseholders feel safer. I know that Eve is on the call and I'm sure she may have a response to that. It may come to the point that we have to talk about purchasing. Well, let's have a look at the Isle of Dogs. Come on, 106, Section 106 money, £106 million worth of Section 106 money. Still, we have £83 million worth of that coming through as well. Then we've also got the new homes bonus money. We've almost got for Tower Hamlets, just for building homes, £206 million. That's how much we've received for building new homes in Tower Hamlets. And I bet a huge majority of them are on the Isle of Dogs. Now, £39 million worth of money is still left with the council. So I know that John, if he was here, he would at least listen to me, whether or not we have our, disparities in our arguments and, our difference of opinion. But at the end of the day, if we are building homes and we are receiving Section 106 money, infrastructure money, isn't infrastructure part of making people safe in their homes? So a tall ladder, having that is more of a prevention, making sure that at a time of crisis, like we had a couple of weeks ago on the Isle of Dogs, at least we've got something for residents and leaseholders. And that I've spoken about. There's something else I want to see on a local level. And I have met with friends in high places, and I have been emailing and raising letters about this, is that actually what we have on the Tower Hamlets website, we've actually got to have a bigger portal of information for affected leaseholders, whether they are shared ownership, private developments, or people in housing associations. They have to have not 0.5% part-time officer from the council, but at least 2 or 3 officers or a group of people to be able to give some direction, information, and some what you've put together, a seminar, so that we will be able to make sure that leaseholders are supported. In the budget in March, I actually put forward that the current administration should think about some kind of seminar for affected leaseholders in the borough, so that the council leads on it. You have information about what we're doing. You can come forward and ask for what you need. Let's talk about wake-in watch. Now, leaseholders are going to be having to pay for those wake-in watches. And some of what I've understood in the New Statesman is that the average cost is going to be £331 per household per month. That's outrageous. You're already facing the cost of the fire safety works, service charges, then you've got the additional £331. And my final point, and which I think that, well, 2 points, I'm sorry, just just on the supplementary guidance for planning. Now, I sit on the Strategic Development Committee. I have done so since 2018. I'm not here to make comments about any planning applications which are live, but I am here to say that actually what John talked about, the fact that we need to look at possibly our planning documents, that we may need additional supplementary documents that show that tall towers must have 2 staircases, so that there are exits, 2 exits for people. I think now, in light of COVID, in light of Brexit, and in light of Grenfell, our planning applications and our planning policy documents, we actually need to look at them and refresh them and see if we need to add any more information. And the way to do that is to actually listen and now consult with leaseholders affected by the fire safety issues or cladding, so that we are best informed for the future in building a stronger infrastructure and stronger buildings, safer buildings. And the last point I want, and this is my final point, is that I am really concerned about the mental health of leaseholders who have been impacted by cladding, by the fire safety. 90% of residents in this country are affected by mental health. 90% of leaseholders affected by the fire safety scandal, they have mental health issues, whether they are single parent households, families, or professionals. It doesn't matter, it cuts across class, race, sexuality. People have mental health problems, and I would like to see as a council that we can give forward some sort of support mechanism for those people. And I think we saw a huge crisis with Brexit, but I see this as a political crisis for many parties in this country. In fact, it's like a constitutional crisis. I have never seen, I never thought that I would agree with the Reform Party, because they're standing up for people affected by leaseholders. They're also standing up for PR. But what it shows that there is a political appetite out there for people to stand up for the rights of leaseholders. And I think this government has now finally got to listen to you all. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rubina. And I think there's some very useful points there that can be taken forward. Can I just ask Lucy whether we've got a couple of quick questions for Rubina from the audience?
Sure. So there's kind of general questions about the council. So people are wondering if Tower Hamlets Council is gathering information on the buildings that are unsafe, and if they are, then are they able to see the information gathered on their buildings? And also, sorry, this is becoming a 3-part question. And if they are they able to register their buildings on this list so the council's aware of it?
Yeah. To the credit of the council officers, they are collecting information, and they have to, because they've got to inform the government. There's a risk register with the council, and the cladding issue is a huge issue. It's at the top of the council's agenda, and so it should be. In terms of whether or not you can see it, in my communication with the council, it's also to make sure that we protect buildings and leaseholders. That kind of information cannot be made public at this moment. And I don't think that they should, because there are leaseholders who live in buildings who might not want their buildings to be out there publicly and to be informed for other people. Whilst they are collecting information, I feel, and I go back to my point, that our portal of information on the council, and I have asked several times, and I've been communicating with the council, and I can share my letters with you all, is that the information that we have, the portal, is not enough. It's got to be a whole section where people can just go in there and quickly find it, because at the moment it's very hard to find. I will say, back in last year, Councillor Andrew Wood, who is on the call, put forward a motion to stand up for leaseholders affected by cladding. And I'm really, pleased that Andrew has really pushed hard to make sure that people like yourselves, your voices are heard. And as part of that motion, I did put forward an amendment, which he kindly accepted, and that is to accept the 10 aims of the cladding campaign, which was Inside Housing had it last year. So that's there as well. One thing I will say is that personally, I support the LKP model for funding the response, which proposes the higher levy on developers. And Caroline Pigeon from the GLA and Hina Bugari, we all support that, because I think that the only way to be able to financially ensure that people do not go bankrupt, go homeless, or find themselves on the street is to make sure that the government undertakes the work, the remediation work.
Thank you. And can I also ask, just to follow on from that, are people able to notify the council regarding their building to ensure it is on, that the council is aware of the fire safety issues?
Yes, there is a team there who are happy to liaise with people, and I do know there's a part-time officer. Now, this is my argument, which has been you can't have a part-time officer. That's not enough for all of these people. What we need is a much bigger team, not just one person or two person. We actually need a small group of people to not only give advice, advocacy, but also collecting raw information so it's there. And also I think our communication from the council with affected leaseholders must be broader, must be far more effective. And I know that councillors across the board have gone and made sure that they've shown their support to leaseholders, and I'm very sure that they would support this, and I think the council would be receptive, and I will push that for you all.
Can I come back to some of that, Lisa?
Yeah,
Eve, I think we would support that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Eve, if I could ask you as well, do you
Yeah.
have a contact email or something like that
Yeah,
for
I can write it
how
in
they can
the
register?
chat. Yeah, so I think there's some kind of bits to explain about the council's role in terms of collecting data, because we do have a team and it is bigger than one person. But what has happened is with the ACM cladding, the council had a role in going out and discussing with building owners and finding out where the ACM cladding was and monitoring that remediation work was happening. The problem with fire safety is it is far bigger than just ACM cladding. And what we are seeing with the Building Safety Fund applications is that there are more and more buildings coming through that aren't safe. Now, we get the information on Building Safety Fund applications through the EWS1 forms, which found where there's work that needs to be done and therefore an application is made from central government. They give that information to us. So we're getting that information. The problem with finding out which buildings are affected in the borough is that there is such a severe workforce shortage with surveyors and fire engineers who can actually identify where these buildings are and where the problems are. So this is an ever expanding problem for the borough, an ever expanding workforce crisis. There really is a whole generation's worth of work in the remediation, but also in the identifying the problem that is done through these EWS1 forms. So we collate that information once it's been assessed through the survey. But if the survey hasn't happened, we know that the building's over 18 metres, but we don't necessarily know what it's made for, or if there's going to be a problem until the survey has happened. And that is the difficulty, getting that information and getting those surveyors in place. And that is a real challenge that central government needs to resource, frankly, to make that happen. And we know it's an ever-expanding problem. We are resourcing it. And also Rabina's put forward in the idea of a portal. I wouldn't support a portal exactly because of that real fear of this information is very sensitive. In my day job, I work for an MP in Wandsworth, and there's a building in Wandsworth that is unsafe, that has had somebody who lives in that building threatening arson on that building. That's the real danger, that we need to be very, very sensitive with this information. And we also need to make sure that we're able to scrutinise the developers effectively, or the freeholders effectively, in our environmental health role. And so we have to be careful with what information is shared. And I think that is right. What is important is that people get good information on the bits that they have to do and get confidence that the work is happening. And we are improving the information that we've got on that, but we really do have to be very sensitive with the information that is there in case it falls into the wrong hands. And that would be, I can't even imagine how horrific that would be.
Can I just come on to that, and just to clarify to Eve, it wasn't information about people's buildings, it was actually just clearer information about guidelines, advice, where they can get help. And at the moment we need to improve on that, and that's happened. And now, Eve, you are on the call, so I would say and ask you that if you could go back and at least have a think about three things. One is the tall ladder. I don't know whether or not you can, but at least have that discussion, because you are leading on the planning, portfolio on this. We do have some public money in terms of the Section 106, the new homes bonus, but we have to think about prevention in the future. So I would appeal to you to at least have a think about that. And the second is the planning documents, the guidance. Have a look at that as well.
I'm going to come back on that as well.
And on top of that, I'd be very happy to work with you.
Yeah, thank you, Regina. So can I come back on some of those points, because I was mid-flow?
Eve, I'm really sorry, because we are running really over time at the moment, and I want to bring in the next part.
Can I have 30 seconds, because Rabina's just posed two questions there that are really important questions. So very good thing in the London plan is fire safety plans, which means fire safety is considered from the beginning in the design stages. So that is a change that's happened on a London-wide level. Really need to welcome that. Our Tower Hamlets planners aren't fire safety experts. I don't want people who aren't fire safety experts setting fire safety policies. I want fire safety experts setting those policies. So I'm pleased to see that happening on a London-wide basis. With regards to the tall ladder, absolutely, we can consider that. When you're having conversations with the London Fire Brigade, we need to scrutinise them, and we need to get good information from them about what they think the best way to fight fires is, and then spend money accordingly. And I don't want us to be deciding to do a tall ladder without asking them first, what do they need?
Okay, thank you, Eve. Can I thank Rabina as well for coming along and putting those points forward. I think they're really helpful, and I think as leaseholders, one of the things is what can we do locally to improve the lot of the leaseholders and the worries and the concerns. And I think that debate that we're having and working together to try and safeguard the leaseholders is really important. So Rabina, can I thank you for that, and hopefully that debate we can carry on and actually see something going forward as well. And I think that needs to happen, and that would be a good reflection of the whole community of Tower Hamlets trying to help themselves. So I think that's important. So thank you very much for Rabina for coming along tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I hurry us on a little bit, because I know that we're running over time as well, and move us on to the second part of the conference, where we've got two people along here tonight, Martin Boyd and Liam Spender, and they are really my go-to people. If I've got a technical problem, who do I turn to? It's Martin and Liam. They are both from Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, which have done some tremendous work in supporting leaseholders, and you will have heard Rabina talking about the proposals that they've put forward to fund the fire safety work. Done a lot of work of that, really useful work. So the next part of the conference is really to allow everybody to put forward their technical questions to ask Martin and Liam. Perhaps I just ought to hand over to Martin and then Liam, just for them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves and their role within the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership. So Martin, can I start with yourself?
Yep, certainly can. Right, we're on, what time are we finishing, Dave?
Well, originally we'd planned it for 8:30. We're running quite a lot over. I don't know how long you and Liam and people want to stay, but if I said, could we go on for another half an hour, would that be possible?
No problems. Right, okay, I am chair of the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, which is a charity that has been dealing with leasehold issues for many years. The government don't like us particularly because we keep telling them that leasehold is rubbish. We've been involved with cladding since the crisis began and have been helping a number of sites around the country. It is a great pity the politicians have gone, because the most important things I had to say tonight are relevant to them rather than you, because they need to know that there's a debate coming up for the last week of this month on cladding in Parliament, and the MPs need to be speaking at that on your behalf. There is also, we act as the secretariat for the all-party group on leasehold reform, and there's a meeting coming up on the 15th of July where the Deputy Commissioner will be coming along to talk about what happened at the New Providence Wharf fire. So the Thames Waterman ought to be there, and perhaps some of the local councillors might want to come along. In terms of the funding that's going on, I'll let Liam talk to you a bit more about the legal issues. But the bad news for all of you is you basically have not got any chance of suing your developer for the fact that you've got cladding. Leasehold law just does not let you do it, which is why so few people have managed to get things to the courts. So unless the government finds a way of making someone else pay, ultimately the bills are going to land on your doors. So you have to fight like cats and dogs to make sure that that does not happen. Do not for one moment think just because your developer says they might be willing to pay that it's going to happen until they've actually paid for the work and it's been completed. We have seen developer after developer make assurances about paying and then not doing the work. So we are all in deep trouble, and I include myself. We are having to pay to remediate the building where I've got a flat. We don't apply. We don't come within the government funding model. Our building is too old to get fixed, so we're just getting on paying for it ourselves. So that's me.
Yeah. Okay. Liam.
Yes, hello everyone. I won't say too much because I know people are keen to get to questions, but as advertised, I'm a relatively recent trustee of the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, and I consider myself fortunate to be standing on the shoulders of giants. They've done a lot of work, and a lot of people before me have done much more than I have and probably will ever do in this field, but I'm happy to make my contribution, and I'm in this too. So I just over 2 years ago bought a sub 18 metre flat on the Isle of Dogs, which has HPL cladding. So I'm potentially looking at one of these forced loans the government is on about. The current news on that is no news. It seems from noises the government made last week when the leasehold reform brackets ground rent bill was going through the House of Lords that they've alighted on a contractual solution rather than a solution that requires a change in the law. But we'll see what details we get with that. The promise continues to be that we'll see details on the loan scheme for under 18 metre buildings sometime later this year when the building safety bill comes before Parliament. So there's everything to fight for leaseholders, and we should keep fighting, keep the pressure up on the government until we get a solution that's equitable and does the job for everyone involved. And that's my piece.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Liam. And perhaps I can ask Lucy whether you've got some questions there for both Martin and Liam.
Sure, definitely have questions. So Liam, this question has a bit of a legal bent. Several people live in buildings that would not have been compliant with building regulations at the time they were built. And actually, I'll ask you a follow-up to this question as well after your answer. But people are wondering what their legal recourse is in terms of, I would assume, suing the freeholder, the building inspector, the developer.
Well, a whistle-stop tour of the principles. I don't know all the facts of that case, but I can give a whistle-stop tour of the legal principles. Is there is no civil claim for breach of building regulations against anyone because that section of the law has never been brought into force, so it has no legal effect. So in order to claim against anyone, you would have to have some other basis of making a claim, either for breach of contract or breach of duty of care. And as Martin mentioned, in most cases, if the building is more than 6 years old, or it's more than 6 years since you bought off plan, you're pretty much stuffed because of limitation rules in bringing any claim for breach of contract or breach of duty of care. And there's an added problem, which is why we urgently need a proper funding solution. This is a political choice, not a legal problem. It's a political choice for the government to take action rather than a legal problem that needs legal action to solve. But the additional problem is, even where the local council or a private approved inspector has signed off on a building that's later demonstrated not to have complied with building regulations, is following a House of Lords case from the early 1990s. There is no legal recourse against that inspector for losses measured only in money. Grenfell will probably prove for sure that where people have died, there may be a claim, but for people who are in the position that most of us are, which is they're facing these huge ruinous bills, there is no legal recourse as things currently stand, unfortunately.
Okay, and for buildings that supposedly have NHBC cover, it seems that frequently people are being told that their warranty doesn't apply because it wasn't signed off by an NHBC approved building inspector. In many cases, it was signed off by a local authority building inspector or others. Do people have any options in that situation? Is there been any cases brought for that?
There have been certainly cases brought against the NHBC, and that is an example of a contractual claim. So whether you can get any money out of the NHBC depends on the terms, the words in the warranty. I believe there is some work underway amongst regulators and a group of leaseholders where NHBC has given that answer that they're not liable because their approved inspector arm didn't do the work, whether that's actually holding water in law. So it would be a case of watching this space. And it is a ray of hope, but if your building is more than about 10 or 11 years old, even if it has NHBC cover, unfortunately, that's the time limit for claims. So even if you find out after and you couldn't have found out before, then the NHBC warranty won't cover you because you have to make a claim within 10 or 11 years usually.
Thank you. Martin, if I can ask you a question. People are asking what the situation is at the moment with funding. So if you could clarify what size buildings are eligible and what the funding covers, and what the deadlines are, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. Well, we have a deadline coming up at the end of this month. So we currently have a question in with the minister. Are they sticking to that deadline or not? Because a lot of buildings just haven't got their applications in on time. So the government has said it will fund cladding remediation on all buildings over 18 meters. But that's only the cladding. It's not the other associated building safety works. However, although they've said they'll fund all of them, some people are getting their applications turned down. On the under 18 meter buildings, the government doesn't actually know how many buildings we've got, how many need fixing, or how they're going to fund it. They've stolen a bit of a proposal that we had, which was to introduce a levy scheme, and are talking about using that to help put money into the system. But we're not clear yet whether that's going to help fund the government or whether they're going to use that to help fund cladding. On the under 18 meter plan, that they are talking about a forced loan scheme, which is something that we don't agree with, the Labour Party doesn't agree with. The argument is that they are going to provide loans that are, quotes, affordable and would be no more than £50 a month. Now, for some people, an extra 50 quid is maybe not a problem. For other people, it's a huge problem. And why is it your responsibility to pay for the building if it's under 18 meters, but it's not your responsibility if it's over 18 meters? So at the moment, it's still in a bit of a mess, to say the least.
Sounds good. Okay, the next question. Is there, and this actually I'll put to both of you if you don't mind, is there any way that housing associations or freeholders can be forced to disclose information regarding the conversations they're having with developers about the remediation works and the fire safety defects? And if there isn't specifically in law, is there any action you would recommend that people take?
Liam, do you want to do the legal bit first?
Yes, happy to. So it depends on what basis the conversations are being held. So to give you an example, if the building is within warranty, or if the freeholder, sometimes housing associations have something called a collateral warranty, which is where when they buy the building, they get an agreement that they have rights against everyone who was involved in the construction, not just the builder. So they're in a stronger position to leaseholders. If there's a conversation going on about a claim that's within time, then that's probably privileged. So you wouldn't be able to see it because it's probably covered by some sort of without prejudice privilege, which protects communications between parties who are trying to reach a settlement. And there's nothing suspicious about that. That's a good thing because it means parties can talk frankly. I think the area where leaseholders should be concerned is where the freeholder or the housing association says, oh, don't worry, 6 years or 6 years is coming up for claims outside the NHBC warranty, or 10 or 11 years is coming up for claims under the NHBC warranty. Don't worry, we've got it all under control. We're talking to the developer. Don't buy that. Write to the agent, the freeholder, the housing association, and say, confirm to me in writing, which they can do. It wouldn't break privilege that you have something called a tolling agreement or a limitation agreement in place, that time is standing still. So if your talks break down, if indeed they're happening, you can still pursue them, and no one will come along later and say you're out of time. And I'll hand over to Martin on the rest. That's the legal side of it.
So just before Martin kicks in, can I just say, for a number of people, myself included, a lot of this is extremely valuable, but also sometimes a little bit difficult to follow because we don't understand what you understand. So at the end of this conference, can we send stuff out to all of the attendees that says, if you find yourself in a shitty situation, which I'm guessing pretty much everybody on this call is, in varying degrees, or varying degrees of progression or varying degrees of shittiness. So we could write in, and then perhaps we could take Liam, your expertise, and Martin, your expertise, and we can just put together something for people that say, this is what you could do in your situation.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it is massively frustrating for everyone, lawyers like to keep things secret, don't you, Liam? It's the way that they work, because supposedly everyone can then agree things behind your back. The trouble with that position is you only get to find out when it's all gone horribly wrong, or occasionally it's gone right. So I would say, ask your MP to intervene. If you've got your landlord saying that they are in any forms of discussion with a third party and they can't tell you about it, they can tell your MP more. They can have a privileged conversation with them. And your MP can tell you whether you need to worry, or hopefully whether you can be a little bit confident. But it is massively frustrating when somebody turns around and says, it's your home, but it's nothing to do with you. What we're going to do about it, we're just going to send you the bill if it turns out that we can't find you a solution. So keep kicking everyone would be my suggestion. Very hard.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just echo that from Martin, that, you know, we've with considerable effort, we formed the all-party parliamentary group, which has the chairman of, you know, Sir Peter Bottomley, Justin Madders and Daisy Cooper, representing the three major parties. For goodness sake, if you need information from your managing agent or your freeholder or from a developer, copy in your local MP and copy in the all-party parliamentary group chairs as well. I'll put in chat their email addresses. Use this resource and copy us in as well, because we do need this information. You know, if we can get things, I mean, some of these cases can be pushed into the public domain, but certainly use those MPs. You will get a response from them. They're very jumpy about seeing quite senior MPs who are pretty gobby in the House of Commons taking an interest in these issues.
What I would actually say, though, that I think a lot of people don't realise that's an avenue that's open to them. So I think that's almost part of the point of this evening is you can sort of suffer in silence, but actually there's a hell of a lot of us, particularly in Tower Hamlets, that are going through the same thing and all have varying degrees of you know, interaction with support groups or people who feel utterly isolated. So, and you know, part of what comes out of this evening is I hope that people who don't feel that they've had any form of connection or support group or anything else now know that they can reach out to all of the groups that have spoken tonight.
I think that leads nicely to the next question, Nat. So the next one, essentially, if I'm condensing several here, is if somebody gets a bill that lands asking for £50,000 for remediation, Martin, Seb, Liam, what do you recommend that their first steps should be?
Right, okay, nobody's going forward on this one. Right, the unfortunate news is if you get a bill for £50,000, you have to pay it. What you must not do under any circumstances is to decide that you are going to withhold money and fight. Because if you do that, you give all the advantage to the landlord in being able to take you to court for breach of lease. Now, of course, we all know that none of us have got £50,000 sitting around. So the landlords are all trying desperately. Well, maybe some of you have got 50,000 quid sitting around. So the landlords are trying desperately not to take people to court. So they will try and soften the blow, we think. The one thing you have to be very careful of, if you agree any form of funding agreement with your landlord, is they will try and get you to waive your rights in challenging those costs at the tribunal. You have to do all you can to try and fight that and still reserve your position. It may be very difficult because they may say, well, we're just not going to let you pay in time. But there is no choice. If that bill lands on the doorstep that says you've got to pay the 50 grand, you do have to somehow find it.
Could I just make some comments on this? I mean, the idea that tens of thousands of people lose their homes because of this, I think, is politically impossible. I think that the government will move heaven and earth to prevent that happening. But I do think that several hundred people could lose their homes because of this. They could fall through the net. So I think that it's important, and I don't know quite how this coheres, because we know that how these sort of these debts crystallize, as it were. We know that Section 20s have been issued. We know that bills have landed on people's doorsteps, but we're not aware of any property managers or freeholders rather moving on to forfeiture. You're not aware of any forfeitures, I take it, Martin? No, right. So nothing is happening. Everybody is holding fire. And I think this is the crucial moment where you've got to make sure that things do hold fire until it's has to be everybody together, as it were, because that means it's impossible. But it is, I'm afraid, there has been a sort of danger that I've been alert to for some months, that some private small-scale freeholder will go and launch the A-bomb, as it were, and do forfeiture to remediate a building, and some leaseholders will be impacted on that. But I think that the objective of our campaigning to sort this effectively is to try to get this matter to rise to a head where the leaseholders are to some degree united and that a crisis is landed on the door of the government. And in that way, I think that there is possible resolution. That's vague and it's inadequate, but it is a way that I think this crisis will evolve.
And I agree. I mean, I think it's if there's an old adage that if you owe the bank £100, it's your problem, but if you owe the bank £100 million, it's the bank's problem, and that's the issue that Seb's just outlined. If freeholders need to collect millions of pounds from leaseholders in one building and they can't do it, it's as much their problem as it is the leaseholders' problem, because if they forfeit the flats, and obviously we can't rule out the prospect that the unscrupulous landlord will do that, but if they forfeit the flats, the bill comes back to them. So if you do get a bill, Martin's right, you will eventually have to pay it. That's the way leasehold works. Otherwise, you do run the risk of forfeiture. But make their life difficult. Demand to see the documents underpinning the Section 20. Go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Check that the contractors who've been identified aren't associated with the landlord. Publicise the bill. Send it to your MP. Send it to LKP. Send it to Robert Jenrick. Send it to Rishi Sunak. Raise hell. Make life as difficult as possible for them. And we saw this week there was a case in Manchester where they backed off the bill. They said they were going to go back to the drawing board because they didn't like the publicity. So publicity is your friend here.
Could I ask you just to explain for people the difference between forfeiture and repossession, because I think there's a lot of confusion over that.
Yeah, so repossession is the right of a lender with security to take property if the conditions of the loan that's secured by the property are not met. So that's something a bank can do if it has a mortgage. If you don't pay your mortgage, the bank can take the property as payment of the mortgage, and it also has the right to pursue you for any difference between the value of the property and what's outstanding on the loan. Forfeiture is a legal right of a landlord, entirely separate from repossession, to take back the leased property if you do not comply with the terms of the lease. And what are the terms of the lease is you have to pay the bills the landlord sent you. And these days there are all sorts of restrictions on the ability to exercise it. The landlord has to jump through various hoops. So they have a similar result, which is you lose your property. But there's one key distinction, which is forfeiture. The landlord does not have to account to you for any surplus value. So if your flat's worth £100,000 and you owe the landlord 50, the landlord keeps the 50. If your mortgage is £50,000 and the flat's worth £100,000, when the bank sells it, it has to give you back your 50. That's a key distinction between the two.
Thank you. So it sounds like the three of you are all suggesting question everything, ask for all the documentation, and make as much noise as possible. Use the media, use your MP, use your councillor. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's right. And I think it's really important that there are networks such as, I mean, you've got Katie Kendrick here from the National Leasehold Campaign. You've got Ritu from UCAG. For goodness sake, everybody must sort of really connect with each other and make sure that nothing slips through the net here. If you're going to be pressed for payment, we've got to know immediately. You know, everybody must know. If they're going to go for forfeiture, let us know. The whole lot of us are going to kick off on that, yeah. And the MPs will fire off. The thing I dread is people slipping through the net. It's not. I tend to think it's more these sites that get in touch with us from places like Basingstoke and Stevenage and so on, who are still really behind the curve on all this. They're the major concerns. The city sites, I think, are pretty well informed and have got a good network of people who are really quite up to speed on this. But some people are really quite late with this, and that's where I fear with some of our ghastly landlords that have acquired these freeholds in auctions. That's where I'm mostly concerned.
Okay, Liam, I think this is a question for you. Is somebody able to rent out their flat if there are these fire safety issues? And if they are they under any obligation to let future tenants know that there are these issues?
I think two points. So whether or not you can let out your flat depends on the terms of your lease. Most of them will allow you to let out on the way most flats are rented out, so something called an assured short hold tenancy. You may need to pay a fee to the landlord to get consent to do that. If there's a mortgage, you may also need to pay a fee to the bank and let the bank know that you're letting it out. So that's point one. Point two, in terms of disclosure, I think if there's anything that affects evacuation, so waking watch and the fact that it's simultaneous evacuation, you must leave when the alarm goes off, then you probably owe a duty of care to the tenant to let them know that there isn't what most people assume is in place, where if there's a fire, you stay put, if there's a fire, you get out. But beyond that, I think you probably wouldn't have much of a duty to tell them anything unless it's something that affects their safety. But each case will vary.
Okay. And for buildings that meet the criteria of the Building Safety Fund, and where freeholders have been really late in getting the issues evaluated and preparing the documents necessary to register with the Building Safety Fund. So even for those that have not missed the deadline, but because the Building Safety Fund disperses its funds on a first come, first served basis, if your freeholder has registered after all the funds have been dispersed or after the deadline, are there any grounds for suing the freeholder?
Oh, you're on
mute. I guess you'd have thought I'd got the hang of this by now. But is that one for me?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. I think if it would be a highly fact-specific question, but my view would be if the building was known to have things that made it eligible for the Building Safety Fund when it was still open for applications, so up to the 31st of July last year, and the landlord did not apply in the knowledge that it could have applied, I think there's a good argument for saying the landlord can't recover the proportion of the bill for remediating the property that would have been met by the Building Safety Fund. That can't be recovered through the service charge, because the law requires that anything that's billed through the service charge must be reasonable in purpose and reasonable in amount. So if your landlord has not registered for a grant that would have been available, the expenditure isn't reasonable in purpose. I mean, obviously you'd have to convince a judge of that, and it would involve a legal fight, but I definitely think there's an argument there. I think if the building was discovered to have defects after the window closed, so after the 31st of July last year, then you probably wouldn't have a basis for suing the landlord or the managing agent, because they were in the dark. The key is the knowledge of the landlord or the agent. That's what would drive the claim, in my view.
Thank you. Is it okay if I ask a couple of questions to Eve? Because there were a number, there's loads that I haven't gotten to. Eve, are you still with us?
I am, yep.
Hello. So one question was, has the Mayor Tower Hamlets Council had meetings with MHCLG to make sure that that our issues are being heard and they're aware of them?
Yeah, frequently. Officers meet with them every couple of weeks. So those meetings take place on an officer level, and then the Mayor and I have also met with Lord Greenhalgh. I took over this brief a couple of months ago, but before that there were also regular meetings with him, so that is happening. A lot of our lobbying on an officer level is behind the scenes stuff that people wouldn't necessarily be aware with, but there's absolutely an open dialogue there going on.
Okay. And then another question is concerns over paying council tax. Is there is the council able to waive council tax, seeing as our homes have a nil value? Eve? Oh, I think it's frozen.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
No, it's all right. The picture has come back, but the sound is still, I think Eve is gone.
Okay. Should we try and see if Rubina knows the answer to that question? She's
Sure.
Yeah. Hopefully it wasn't the question.
Hopefully it was.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite, was the question to me?
Sorry, Rubina. So the question is whether the council is willing to waive council tax payments on those whose homes have received an A3 or B2, so effectively being given a zero valuation from the banks.
So for me, I'm a Liberal Democrat opposition councillor. So if a resident or group of campaigners came to me, I would take it to the current administration. I would campaign on it, either bring a motion or put a question. But it is up to the administration as to how they would do that. But council tax is not set by, the council can increase the rate or the charge or the increase it, but they can't go around doing too much with it. That's more of a parliamentary level. So I would say with the current administration, I think they would probably have some difficulties with that.
I'm sorry, Lucy, we're midway through questions. My electricity cut off, so I'm now hotspotting in. Sorry about that. So you told me that you had another question and then my internet cut off because the electricity went off.
Yeah, so the question was whether the council has the appetite to waive the council tax payments from those whose homes have been given a B2 or an A3 valuation. So where they have a nil value assigned to them from the banks.
So the council offers council tax reduction based on people's income. And that's something that we offer to people on very low incomes, and that's an important and valuable thing. I think actually legally we can only do that on an income basis. That would be very difficult for us to do because it would hit the vital public services that the council funds hard. We're struggling to pay for things like adult social care, children's social care, and those are important things. So I wouldn't say that there'd be that appetite at the moment. That's something that people can campaign for if they want, but there'd be legal questions about whether or not it'd be legal. And it would put us in great difficulty in terms of funding vital public services.
Okay, thank you. I think, Dave, should we leave it there because we've gone over half an hour, and I know you still want to sum up.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, Lucy, and for all those questions as well. And can I also say thank you to Liam and Martin and Seb as well for taking all the technical questions as well. And I hope people, and I'm sure they have, found that really useful, and the support that they've offered to leaseholders. So thank you for that. I'd probably just like, before we go, briefly to firstly invite Harry just to say a few things to people before they go. So Harry.
Just very quickly, Tower Hamlets leaseholders have been too quiet for too long. They've worried about their property values for far too long. They've hidden behind residents associations and all the rest of it for far too long. These residents associations in many cases cause the problems, don't solve them, because they're also scared of their own shadows. And basically all I wanted to do is echo the comments of my colleagues Liam, Martin and Sebastian at Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, that actually you've got stories, all of you all have individual stories. Give us your stories. You know, I'm at LKP with Seb, with Liam, Martin, and Lucy's been doing great work as well with LKP and for LKP with a financial package. You've got stories, give it to us. And then Seb's got an amazing network of journalists. Lucy has become a journalistic extraordinaire. Liam, Katie at NLC as well. We all want those stories, and then we can place them everywhere and we can cause mischief in a good way. As a charity, we can't lobby, but that's one thing we can do, place stories everywhere. So do that. And also Ruth's group with Friends in High Places, but also our one, we want to try and get shared owners and leaseholders together, and even those in the social blocks at Section 106 sites. And actually the council, even though we can blame the central government, and they've done appallingly on this stuff, and this is my personal view, not LKP's, but they've done appallingly, central government. This is a human rights issue. Local government can actually innovate in the same way Sadiq Khan has done with shared ownership, with 990-year leases that LKP have backed. So actually local government can actually say to the government, look at what we've done in Tower Hamlets. We are a model borough. We have got high-rise living right. And obviously we'll help you, support you as a council with that one over the next few years. But anyone that's got stories, send it to LKP, send it to Tower Hamlets Justice for Leaseholders, and fight. Because if you don't fight, no one else will. And LKP is a tiny charity, and it's up against like a multi-billion-pound industry in other people's homes. And even housing associations have been naughty as well.
Yes,
Ruth.
And I would just back up what Harry is saying by, we're an actual use case, right? We actually, yes, all right, ultimately it took a fire, and that's not a good precedent for anyone to set. But actually the RA and the people have been fighting since the day we found out that we had ACM cladding. So I would just say, like, if you've been on the call today, if you've been on the conference today, if your question hasn't been answered, please just get in touch, because we will, all of the people who have been on the call are more than willing to answer your questions. We just, you get limited time. So we have examples of where things have gone very well and we've won, and we have examples of where people are in utter dire situations and we don't know how to help them, the full spectrum. So, but Tower Hamlets is where we're going to have it all. So please do get in contact with us if you feel that your question hasn't been answered and you'd like to know more.
And one last thing, learn from Katie Kendrick and Ritu Saha, because they are phenomenal human beings that have literally dedicated their whole lives to this for the last 2 or 3 years for free, basically, volunteer. Katie just put in the group chat, she had a leasehold house, which again is kind of like yesterday's news, should be in theory, but the fact that she's having to campaign as doing 16 hours as a nurse for people like us in the fancy blocks in Docklands and all these other flats, which have lots of other different unique issues, is remarkable. And Ritu as well, I saw she posted a Facebook post a few days ago about, look, it's hard to get people to turn up to this protest on the 15th of July. And, we've always said it, leaseholders sometimes are their worst enemies. And it's had to take Katie, Ritu to throw their weight behind LKP to actually show that this isn't just some crusty policy issue. This is actually millions of people's lives. And just, if anyone wants to campaign, get involved with the groups, but also obviously they're busy, but try and maybe get in touch with Katie and Ritu as well for tips.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I just want to thank you, Dave, for doing a fabulous job of chairing tonight and for organising this. Thank you so much. And for all the speakers and for the preparation you've done, the time you've dedicated this evening. But just everyone, remember, you are not on your own. We have our strength in working together, and just reach out, contact us on the Facebook page, Tower Hamlets Justice for Leaseholders, and we will continue to try and put on these kind of events, because supporting each other is the way to go. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah,
thank you, Ruth. You're just the best, most supportive.
Can I thank Ruth, Harry and Lucy and Natalie as well as all the speakers that we've had on tonight. And I know some of them aren't still with us and had to rush off. I knew they apologise that, but I know Rabina's still here. So thank you, Rabina. And Eve is also still here. And all the people from Leasehold Knowledge Partnership that do a fantastic job behind the scenes for us and support us so much. I really appreciate their support. So thank you to them. We will be sending out after this meeting all the details of all the contacts for you. Give us a couple of days to sort that out, but I'll let you that so you can actually do it. Some of the details are in the chat, but we'll bring them all together with you as well. And lastly, can I just thank everybody for coming along tonight and listening to us. And so thank you, and I hope to see you in another conference and maybe even at a protest shortly. So thank you very much.